Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 98 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. And as you can see, I'm delighted to welcome Brian Gerrish to join me tonight.
Thank you very much, Ian. A pleasure to be here.
And thank you for travelling so far to join me this evening.
Okay, not too far.
Just next door. And tonight, the reason that Brian is with me is because after 98 episodes, we have almost come full circle, because when we started Humanity versus Insanity almost 4 years ago now, the first 3 episodes, Brian and I focused on addressing the issue of the changes that we have seen in police behaviour.
Yeah.
And we focused, in fact, we were originally going to just do 1 episode and that went into 2, but we had so much material.
Yeah.
We went to 3 episodes, and those episodes can still be viewed on the Humanity versus Insanity playlist, where you can find all of the previous episodes, except for a couple which we have had to hold back for varying reasons. But we're talking again tonight about the role of the police in the rapidly advancing corporate police state, where it's becoming increasingly evident that the corporations have precedent over the private citizen, which of course is exactly as it is in the United States. So, Brian, before we actually address these issues, we're actually going to be speaking at an event together in London in 3 weeks now.
We are. It's going to be very good.
I think so. AV 8.1.
Which must say, Ian, how quickly things are moving, because you felt the need to get in another event in order to be fully up to date with what's going on.
Well, things are moving so quickly that originally I was going to just focus on the rush to transhumanism. And this will certainly be the topic that Dr. Graham Downing will address. But yourself and Patrick Henningsen and I will be addressing other literally up-to-the-minute topics.
Well, yes, but I think we're going to end up talking about things which are all part of that stream of information heading towards transhumanism, because there is no question that's where they're going.
Exactly.
The human being is to be modified and replaced.
Yeah, and we actually may be the last generation that sees out our lives in this mortal coil in full human form without the addendum of technology.
I think that's true, and I think they are rapidly heading towards the chipping of human beings. And I was told this morning there's been some debate, I think it was on Radio 4, where a particular professor said, yes, he believed that we should be moving towards getting babies chipped. So it's coming.
Well, as Greg Nicoletto said when he presented at AV3 some, almost 7 years ago now, and his seminal presentation, and he said then, first your pets, then your kids, then you.
Yeah. And
unfortunately, Ray Kurzweil, who is one of the prime movers behind this agenda, 20 years ago, he was regarded as a sort of an eccentric visionary. But today he is director of engineering for Google, so he has access to unlimited funds to pursue his perverse agenda.
Yeah. Everything database. So you buy a cup of coffee, you throw your cardboard cup out the window of your car. I think this is one of the things that was actually mentioned at back at that AV event. Greg was talking about this. You buy a cup of coffee, you drink your coffee in the car, you throw the cup out the window, it's found. They can tell who made the cup and all the details, who supplied the material. They can also say who bought the cup, where you bought it, and you then get the fine through the post. So, working towards everything being databased.
And the issue really is, of course, would you rather have an insight into what's unfolding here, or would you rather just bury your head in the sand? And of course, one of the key issues that we'll be addressing is the advent of 5G technology. Which is, this is 5G Wi-Fi and mobile phone technology. And the frequencies are the same frequencies that are used by the US military for crowd control.
Yeah. Well, I think we're just seeing systems that previously we would have regarded as being military type systems are now drifting across. In fact, that is the wrong way, because of course the systems always get produced within private companies or the big corporations, and then it's sold across to the military. So most of the research and development is done in commercial companies in the first place, albeit in the past it used to be the military that got the best stuff first. I don't think that's the case anymore.
Well, and really the subject that we're talking about tonight, which is the rapidly advancing corporate police state. Yeah. Of course, the agenda that we're talking about is of transhumanism, is one that the vast majority of people are unlikely to accept willingly. And of course, at that juncture, the state and those behind the state need a force that pushes this agenda. And what we're seeing is this change in the techniques of policing, so that this paramilitary force is there to literally do the corporatist bidding.
And we've seen the change in the police quite quickly. I paid attention to the change in uniforms. So if we go back 20 years ago, we had our policemen and women in white shirts and trousers, and okay, it was a uniform. You knew they were there to do a job, but it was a smart uniform. It was relatively human. Now we've gone to these all black uniforms where we're not even seeing identification numbers. We're not seeing names. And when the police are now involved in the heavier operations, of course, they're wearing military style helmets and they're often covering their faces, all in black. So this is deliberate policy. It's designed to be intimidating, but also it's dehumanising.
Absolutely. And even on the anti-fracking campaign, and we're going to look at some of the events that have occurred recently here, and we're going to look at the dichotomy between what the police say and what they actually do. But here we have a campaign that is peacefully peaceful. I mean, essentially peaceful, even acknowledged by the police, as you'll see. It's peaceful. And yet the police are adopting gratuitous aggression to force through the corporate agenda. So what I'm going to do, Brian, is I'm going to just show a very, very short clip of a film and I'll show you where you can see the extended version of this film after it, but just a little under 3 minutes. But this is a film primarily of events that have occurred at Preston Road and the anti-fracking protest that has been going on there since Quadrilla rolled onto the site in January of this year. So take a look at this.
I want the police to stop brutalising us.
Are you okay? Oh my God, she's screaming! Are you okay?
It's all right. Look
at this dragging people, guys.
I want them to allow us our right to peaceful protest, and I want them to stop assaulting us, and I want people to know what they're doing. So,
if we hadn't some of these people, because I'm not prepared to stand at a gate and be thrown about, if we hadn't some of these people, Quadrilla will just walk straight in, and it'd just go on.
The vast majority of protest activity has been highly disruptive, and it tends to involve lock-ons, blocking of the road, blocking of the site, but it is not violent. And I think that is generally very much the intention of the protesters, not to offer violence, not to be threatening, but to cause disruption to Quadrilla's activities.
Some days you can go down there and it's relatively peaceful. Other days you can go down there and you are literally thrown about and assaulted all day long. Some days are bits of both. You not only don't know from one day to the next what type of policing or treatment you're going to get, you honestly don't know from 1 minute to the next.
If there's an element of randomness in who is arrested, it can be off-putting for people to turn up because you simply don't know if you're going to be arrested on a particular day for doing something that was allowed yesterday. And so you could appeal to an officer and say, hang on a minute, we were doing this yesterday. It doesn't mean that you won't be arrested on the second day or the third day.
Say a fellow protector on Friday who stood his ground, then did start moving along after the 5 steps had been given, and he was arrested.
But our approach, right from the word go, has been that we want to have the very low-key policing operation. We want to engage, we want to negotiate, we want to facilitate, and wherever possible, we want to allow people that right to protest.
We said no! We said no! We said no! We said no! We said no!
Well, my thanks to Nina Taylor for her permission to show that clip. Now, the full film, and if we can bring this up on screen, Mike, the full title of that film is A Chilling Effect on Freedom to Protest, and it can be found on the YouTube page of Gathering Place Films. And I would encourage you to watch the full, I think it's about 8 or 9 minute version of that. Now, what we saw in that video was the use of pressure points. And this was, the first time I saw this being used was actually at Balcombe, which is now a little over 4 years ago. And this was bank holiday, I think, in 2013. And I believe this is Caroline Lucas's son, who was one of the people sitting down in front of the gates of the Quadrilla site at Balcombe in West Sussex 4 years ago. And here the police, you can see, are clearly pushing on the pressure point to try and get him to release from the arm lock he was in with his mother. And what you saw in the video, Brian, of course, was the police actually using gratuitous use of pushing on the pressure point to cause maximum discomfort to the protester at Prestonby Road. I mean, you haven't seen that clip before.
No, I haven't.
What were your thoughts on watching that?
Well, I think it's obvious the police are being particularly aggressive, and for me, out of that sequence, it was the man being pulled out of his wheelchair, which is a classic, because if you're in a wheelchair, you are hardly going to hurt anybody, and yet he's brought down to the ground by two policemen. So the intent of the police is to be totally hardline, and now we see them, I'm going to say, starting to use some dirty little tactics like the pressure point. So what's in my mind is this is to do with police policy, isn't it? Somebody somewhere has actually set out the policy that the police are going to use on these protesters, and it's aggressive and it's very hard line. Now, my next question is, where has that policy come from? Has that policy just come from the Chief Constable, or is this a policy which central government is injecting back into the police to say, our policy in UK is to permit fracking, we don't want the public to stop fracking, and if there's any form of protest, albeit peaceful, you are to use maximum force in order to break it up. So somebody somewhere is responsible for the policy, and I think that's a key thing to find out. But what are we seeing? We're seeing that the police are simply standing up for the big corporate interests. And do they understand what they're doing? This is the next point, because I don't think the police do. They do not understand the actual constitutional issues of the police policing for the interests of big corporations. So there's a lot of issues going on here, but who is making the policy? Is it coming from the Home Secretary? Is it coming from Amber Rudd? Or is this something coming out of the Police Chiefs Council, what was ACPO originally? We need to be asking these questions, but it's definitely brutal police.
Well, and what's
policing.
interesting is that the silver commander of the operation in Lancashire was recorded on video there of acknowledging that this is a fundamental peaceful protest. In fact, there has not been a single case, despite the fact that they try and allude to it. And in fact, the Daily Telegraph actually quoted Francis Egan of Quadrilla as stating that there had been acts of violence and threats against his employees, which the Daily Telegraph subsequently rescinded and issued an apology because it's poor reporting, because they simply took his word at face value without doing a fact check with the police. And when they did, they realised, of course, and the police actually had to acknowledge that there had not been a single case of violence from the protesters. and there hadn't been any allegations or charges of intimidation.
I think the police have got a problem, and the problem for the police is to do with training. It's quite clear that everything the police are doing with training at the moment is about fighting potentially all violent uprising on the streets. This is what they're talking about. This is the sort of gear they've got. This is what their training facilities provide. The police up against people who are very angry, who are prepared to be violent, are using violence. When you end up with a situation where people are not being violent, what do the police do? How do they work? I think what's happening is in their minds, into play is coming the training, which is how you deal with violent people. So they are acting in this very aggressive, forceful way because it's the only thing they know how to do. They're not being taught how to police peaceably. And I think we've been seeing more and more signs of this over the years. We've seen how much more equipment the police have been getting, from the nightstick type batons to CS sprays to taser. Well, the taser is a weapon as dangerous as a firearm at close range. People are dying as a result of tasers. So everything is the police being geared up to fight a battle. But in this situation where people are saying, well, no, we're being peaceful. Yes, we're being disruptive, because that's the whole point of the demonstration. The police on the ground can't deal with it. So, yes, we've got to look at the police, and we've got to ask questions of the individual area commanders. But I think we've also got to ask questions of the Home Secretary, and we've got to ask questions of the Police Chiefs Council, because they are all involved in making policy as well. And then we've got to look at the people running the police training organisations. And of course, one of the things we pointed out a while ago, I don't know whether she's still in place, but the head of the police training, or of the National Police Training Organisation, was a psychiatrist. And you say, how does that work? So there's something very big going on here. I don't think it's just a question of the local police.
Well, having been sort of up close and personal with some of these guys,
yeah.
I mean, having looked them in the eye, let me tell you, I have absolutely no doubt that some of those, if they had firearms and they were instructed to pull the trigger on peaceful protesters, they wouldn't hesitate. Right? Because they follow the orders. I mean, and once they put that earpiece in their ear, they are actually no longer sovereign. They are effectively androids under the control of the commander, whoever that is. And if he says, pull your firearms and fire, they would.
I think what you're talking about there is people who have been seriously reframed. So they're no longer thinking as an individual person. They're no longer weighing up a situation with common sense, care, compassion. They're no longer doing that. They are switching into a mode. And this, I am very sure, is a result of the type of training they're getting, where they are being, they're having their whole mindset changed. We're going to have a look at a Devon and Cornwall policeman in a minute who's very big on Twitter, but you start to get a look into this man's mind by the sorts of images he puts out on Twitter. And I have no doubt what you say is right, Ian, that some of these police are very dangerous because they could flip just on one action on the street, or they get a firearm and they've suddenly become Rambo. They're no longer a police constable. They've become some form of gung-ho.
Well, and some of them, Brian, are clearly dosed up on steroids. And, I mean, I have no idea what the police policy is on steroids, but it is very, very clear. And, what we see is the behaviour that we know is symptomatic with somebody's excessive use of steroids. And of course, this is a very machismo culture.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's the way they walk, it's the gait, the attitude, the inability to actually engage empathetically. I mean, those that can still engage empathetically are sent in as forward intelligence officers, who they have the audacity to label as police liaison officers. But, I mean, I would absolutely discourage anybody from talking to the liaison officers, because they are intelligence gathering.
Well, let's have a little look at this sequence of
Yeah.
slides we've got here. This is a Devon and Cornwall policeman, Sergeant Tangy. This is his Twitter page, and as we're going to see in just a moment, he's won an award for his tweets. So he's tweeting full-time as a Devon and Cornwall policeman, and he's raised a lot of controversy on some of the things he's tweeted. But what is his banner headline showing?
Well, he's an operational firearms commander and tactical advisor in firearms and pursuit.
Absolutely. So we've got a picture, and I find the picture has been taken of that firearm. There's an inherent sinister aspect to this picture in my mind, because there's the firearm, there's his grinning face. He's a firearms officer. To my mind, he can't wait to fire a firearm. And he said that you spend 1 hour learning to shoot and then 9 hours learning not to shoot. In making that statement on his Twitter page, it's almost like there's frustration there. I've learned how to shoot, but I can't actually use the weapon. So if we go to the second one that you've got here, this is the award. And I find it very interesting that in 2016, a policeman is given an award for spending his time tweeting. And who have we got involved? Well, we got the police, of course, but we got Motorola in there. So what is this about? Because if you analyse this, it's the police in bed with big corporations, isn't it? Isn't that what's going on here? So we'll go to the next one. This is just a couple of the sorts of images that he's put up on his Twitter page. So these are public images. He wants the public to see these images. But to me, this is a man who doesn't really think he's a policeman. He thinks that he's Rambo. He's a disappointed special forces man.
He probably failed the entrance test or something to get into the forces, and he's now living out a fantasy.
Well, he's living out a fantasy. The picture of him standing on the Hoe there with the lighthouse in the background, I think, is an absolute classic. But this is all about, look at me, I am a big, tough Rambo. And I think there's something very, very sinister behind these pictures. This is not a community policeman in any shape or form. But to be fair to him, I think that he will have gone through a training process where he has been completely reframed to believe everywhere he goes on Britain's streets, there's a risk of violent terrorism. He will believe that most communities harbour terrorists. And of course, we've got the government saying time after time that a terrorist, well, you can be a domestic terrorist, even if you're non-violent. So his head is going to be pretty heavily reframed with the training. And you've now got somebody who, I think, put him in the right situation, he would flip.
But let's bring it back. He is part of Devon and Cornwall Police, not the Met. Not the City of London Police.
Oh, well, don't forget, a while ago, Ian, in the local papers, we were being told there was a risk of terrorist attacks in the outlying rural areas where there were holiday villages. I mean, we were told we shouldn't be too frightened at the moment, but remember the terrorists could attack. We were going to have ISIS attacks on holiday villages in Devon.
I mean, the fear porn is just unbelievable.
It is outrageous. And of course, this type of stuff is being pumped into these officers using NLP. They don't know it's been given to them in this form. So does this man, do the other Devon and Cornwall officers know that they've been subjected to ideas and policy via NLP? They won't have a clue. But when you talk to them, of course, if you get into one of the subject areas they've been reframed in, you're not going to make any progress.
Well, in their mindset, in their reframed mindset, the reality is that everyone not in uniform will effectively be subhuman to them.
A potential threat is the right way to look at it. They are now being taught that they're out on any routine patrol. You don't know where the terrorist is. You don't know where the terrorist is, where they're coming from, what colour they are, what part of the community, whether they're an adult, whether they're a child. This is being rammed home to the police. And of course, she hasn't been able to speak out publicly, but I had a long conversation with a former Met police officer who said that in her opinion, it was the prevent strategy that was actually fomenting the comeback in the communities. And so we've got this cycle. The government is saying in every school there's a potential Muslim terrorist. And then what's happening is the police are being trained to believe this. And so we've got a cycle going. So we can be pretty hard on the police, and we should be where that's the correct thing to do. But we've also got to say, where has the policing agenda come from? And that has come straight out of central government. It was coming through under Labour, and it's been pouring through under the Tories, which is to create a heavyweight paramilitary armed British police force. Now we're seeing it. So this is the gentleman, but he's so good at tweeting, they sent him to America. In fact, he went to California for a week in order to join a convention. If we just pop that on screen, there we are. So this is the SMILE conference.
Oh, what an acronym. The social media, the internet and law enforcement, SMILE.
Now, this was a whole range of speakers. Over a week, they stayed in the Hilton out there in the States, and they were all talking about how to use social media in order to police and boost the image of the police. This is wacky stuff, Ian, is the best way I could put it. This is people on the edge of reality. They're not there amongst their communities policing. They believe that if they put out a tweet, they're doing their job. And have a look at the next one, because here he is teamed up with one of the American police officers at this event. I mean, this is like a group of schoolgirls at work. I'm sorry, ladies, I don't mean to be too derogatory there, but this is just quite incredible. And the next one we've got, you can research this and have a look at the website yourself if you put SMILE conference. I've got the opening address by one of the American chief constables next to the badge. And then the circle that I've highlighted is the afternoon speech by Sergeant Tangi. I don't know whether you can read any of that.
Yeah, well, interestingly, is the title. The title of his talk is Lipstick on a Pig.
Yes.
Lipstick on a pig. So you say you have a social media strategy. Does it work?
Yeah. So this is pretty amazing stuff. So he had a very nice time there in the sunshine and in the hotel. And of course, the other thing going on, it wasn't just talking about the use of social media. This was bonding police. So you had American police and Canadian police and British police. And while they're there and they're drinking their beer and wine and everything else, they have joined the International Police Officers Club. So now, instead of thinking he's a Devon and Cornwall policeman and his responsibility is to police the local community, in Sergeant Tangi's mind, he's now part of the international armed policing community. And of course, if he's talking to his American colleagues, they are used to being fully armed. They're dealing with armed situations.
Well, death by police is one of the leading causes
of death in America,
death in the US.
Right, so he's going to be mixing with some pretty hardline police, and he's probably going to be quite upset because they get to fire their weapons and he doesn't at the moment. But now you can see how the psychology builds up. How much did it cost to send him to this event? And what did the Devon and Cornwall public get from this police officer going to this event? What did they get? I don't know.
Well, now, lipstick on a pig.
Lipstick on a pig, okay. If you want to take another little peek into this gentleman's mind, this was a tweet that really ruffled some feathers. Some of the national media picked up on it. He pushed out this: addicted to drugs, I'm fed up being your keeper. You knew the risks. Find help, use help, sort it or get lost. Hashtag too much empathy. I think this is a very nasty tweet. I think it's a very dangerous tweet, but the police weren't at all bothered because he is tweeting for Devon and Cornwall Police, and it now appears that this is the official police policy.
So, zero social conscience?
Zero social conscience, yeah. So if you're a drug addict and you're a drug addict because, let's say, you've been sold into abuse, and that's your drug to overcome what you've been through. If you meet up with Sergeant Tangi, you're not going to get much compassion out of that man because he thinks you're a, what does he say, find help, use help, sort it,
well, I mean,
get lost.
What he's ostensibly doing is he's entered into the Henry Kissinger mindset of the useless eater.
Yeah.
And so consequently, anybody who he deems to be not contributing to the corporatocracy, he deems them to be a parasite and therefore expendable, effectively.
Well, a gentleman who's done a lot of work into the child abuse, subject of child abuse up in the Midlands, said to me on one occasion that his local council said to him, "The thing about you, Martin, is as far as we're concerned, you don't exist." And Martin said, "This is immensely dangerous because you've now got public officials that regard you. You're not really there. Doesn't matter what happens to you. Doesn't matter if you're beaten up or found in the ditch or you're dying in the street. You don't exist. You're not really a human being anymore." And this was coming out of, well, I can say it was coming out of Sheffield City Council officers. So this is very, very dangerous stuff. And now we're starting to see, I think we're starting to see the same thing with this police officer. But I am going to say I'd like to know a lot more about who's been training Devon and Cornwall Police. I'll also add that we did all the work 5, 6, 7 years ago, pointing out that Common Purpose was at work inside Devon and Cornwall Police. They spent about £53,000 on Common Purpose training, but officers in the force didn't even know that organisation was at work. And what was Common Purpose doing? Choosing the right people to become the leaders of the police in the future. And now in this area, we've got, and without her name goes out of my head, but we've got a lady who's just become the Police and Crime Commissioner, Alison Hernandez. And of course, she's Common Purpose trained. So you can be sure that she remembers that training. She's interfacing with her Common Purpose colleagues. So yes, we can be tough on the police, but we've also got to start looking at who is being used to train them.
Absolutely.
And well, the couple here we can do pretty quickly because this is part of a video with a West Midlands counter-terrorism officer who's busy ramping up this fear factor and saying, well, we could be encountering terrorists anywhere. We need to be ready. If you press the button, I think there was a bit of an insert on that one. I can't remember what it said now. But
it says, Detective Chief Superintendent Matt Ward, head of the West Midlands Counter-Terrorism Unit, said, "I'm really proud of our officers, particularly our undercover operatives who were in an incredibly dangerous situation."
Yeah, so this is the thing. It's fear. It's mega dangerous situations, much more dangerous than the police ever had to face, apparently. And what's special about this man, he was selected for rapid promotion. So I think his background was law. He came into the police. He did a bit of time as Bobby, and then boom, 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 he's up through the ladder. We saw this in the military in my day at one stage, that they were introducing people as lieutenants in the Navy with absolutely no sea experience at all. What happened? Some of them made some really crass and dangerous decisions. People nearly got hurt, and all of a sudden they said, well, no, we can't do this. You've got to go through the basic training. So training, we are seeing very strange things happening in the police training. And when it's that is introduced together with terrorism and fear of terrorism, and officers psyched up that everybody is a potential terrorist, these people are being taken into some pretty dangerous psychological territory. And some of them are beginning to show it, because we know that the suicide rate in the police has rocketed, and we know that police suffering from emotional problems and stress is absolutely vast, but nobody wants to talk about that.
Well, it's probably exacerbated by the fact that this government is reducing the number of police on the payroll. Yeah. So they're under more and more pressure. I mean, I know that they're being told in some areas that there's no overtime available. We just want you to work extra days. And we're not going to pay you for those extra days, but we'll let you have time off in lieu sometime to be determined.
And then when there's a major event on, they're all being called on standby. So was it last year, a lot of the police lost holiday because they were called and put on standby for supposed major events, which never happened. So a lot of fear, a lot of tension, and a lot of disruption inside the police itself. So routines and rotas being changed, procedures being changed, more and more people with minimal experience coming in. So you could be an experienced police constable, but you're teamed up with somebody who's got no experience. So they're under a lot of pressure themselves. But of course, this is the government policy at the moment, which is disrupting all of our institutions, because the government ultimately wants chaos. I've said that. We put the slides up
openly admitted
of the two Conservative MPs. Bowles was one of them and Kruger was the other. Both of them have said publicly the aim of the Tory party is to create what they called creative chaos.
Because of their underlying philosophy, which is to create order out of chaos.
Absolutely. Yep. So the police, I could be I think I've been pretty hard on the police because they are doing some disgraceful things at the moment. But we've also got to say stuff going on inside the police that even the police don't fully understand. If you get a charity, common purpose, with absolutely no real management capability, what is common purpose? It's nothing. Julia Middleton, what is her actual leadership experience? I'd like somebody to tell me, but her organisation got into virtually every police force across the country to train officers how to become future leaders. What does that mean? Now, they didn't do this because it was a bit of a joke. They did it because they knew they could make an impact on these police officers. Now we see police officers who were a relatively low rank moving up through the ranks, and in their head is a philosophy which they don't even know it was put there.
Well, it's not just the police, is it? It's the National Health Service, it's the Civil Service.
Yeah.
It's pretty much everybody in public life, in the public sector. And so this reframing of behaviour, this reframing of the social responsibility that people in public office once held dear is now to effectively set them above the rest of society.
Chosen leader.
The chosen ones, yeah.
And some of the stuff that they're told is very insidious. It's natural to make mistakes. If you make a mistake, you shouldn't worry about it. It's very normal to make mistakes. Well, you make a mistake with a taser, somebody dies. You make a mistake with a weapon, somebody dies. You make a mistake in custody, somebody could die. But the training coming through it inflates their ego. They're specially selected future leaders. We've chosen you. You are better than other people. That's the ego going up. And if you make a mistake, don't worry about it. So interesting stuff. And the other thing I think we ought to just mention is the fact that we've now got the police operating in partnership with other organisations.
Well, like G4S.
Like G4S.
In Lincolnshire, all Lincolnshire support staff are now on the G4S payroll. Yeah. And you have the G4S logo right alongside the Lincolnshire police logo.
Yeah, so now what are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a police force or a police service? Are you dealing with a corporation? You don't know. We've got the next layer, which is the police working within local councils. This has been happening in Plymouth, it's been happening up in Nottingham, all over the country. So you've lost separation of powers, and you've got police working in different areas.
Can we go to this?
Well, let's bring this one on, because, of course, this is the original story, the abuse going on at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. And why was this of interest so far as the police? Well, of course, it was Sarah Thornton, who was the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police at the time. She did nothing to investigate the abuse at the college. She did nothing to protect the Muslim gentleman who did everything right to try and protect white children from white abusers. Her police officers did not investigate. They did not protect that man. And ultimately, he was hounded out of his job. That lady is now chairman of the Police Chiefs Council. So it's amazing. And what's the significance of the three ladies there? We've got Sarah Thornton together with the head of the college and a lady from Oxford Council, all three of them common purpose graduates. So what do these ladies discuss behind closed doors? We've no way of knowing. They're part of a team, aren't they? And the police have been drawn into the child protection system, so that if you've got a safeguarding board, you'll find that the police are sitting on it. So something goes wrong with child safeguarding, the police are in they're caught in the net, aren't they? They weren't off to one side.
A bit like the IPCC,
yeah,
really.
We can help investigate. No. The police were part of the safeguarding arrangements that have failed. So they're going to lie and cover up. And if you jump on one more, I think we should come to, keep going. We should come through, keep going to the next slide. This one here is a very interesting slide. This is a letter in which the police are talking, so I'll just call that up so I can actually read it myself. This is a complaint that somebody has made, and they're complaining about the way the police have reported have used reference to a taser as if it's a joke. Well, you could have given him a bit of the taser. So somebody's made a complaint about it, and the police have said, oh, we can't treat this as a complaint because you haven't been affected by it. In order to make a complaint, you have to be directly affected by something the police did. Well, I think the person who produced the original complaint would say, well, I have been affected because the police are demonstrating to me that they are acting in a very irresponsible way with a dangerous weapon like a taser. But the police dismiss this. No, you can't make a complaint.
I think if somebody is witness to somebody being tasered, I think that would be a very traumatic experience.
Well, it's a bit more subtle than that in this case, in that there was a particular dialogue and to do with a boxing match, and the police comment was, I nearly suggested that one of them was tasered in order for the other one to win. Now, this is not a very nice comment if it was done after a few beers or whatever, but the fact is a policeman making this comment was the start of the complaint. I think it was justified. Police fob it off. And if you go to the last one here, and I can only give you a segment of this, but what this is part of an email discussion where it emerges that a mental health trust is paying the salary of a policeman in order to work in the trust. And this is because, of course, the police, amongst the terrorist stuff and all the rest of it, are now being told that when they're on the streets, 1 in 4 people has got mental health problems, and therefore that's a problem, that's a danger, they need to help deal with it. So we're now putting police officers, we're taking them off the streets, we're putting them into a mental health setting in order that they can learn to become a mental health nurse. The danger of this is they can go back out on the streets accompanied by a mental health nurse. There's then 2 of them, so technically they could section you on the spot.
Well, we're probably not far from that.
I don't think so.
Sadly.
Think so.
Well, Brian, where does 45 minutes go?
Well, it disappears because there's
especially on this kind of subject. Yeah. Well, interestingly, one of the unconventional gas companies, INEOS, has actually given us an opportunity to address some of these issues in court. Now, this is potentially a massive own goal for INEOS and Jim Ratcliffe. And if we go back to the graphic there, Jim Ratcliffe is the one with the horns. The other one is, of course, Mr. Burns of The Simpsons. And Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS have tried to put an injunction in place that would effectively ban all public assembly and any dissent against a government or corporate agenda. And fortunately, a couple of people have challenged this, and these are the 2 Joes, Joe Corey, who is the son of Vivienne Westwood, and also the founder of Agent Provocateur, and Joe Boyd, who is a frontline activist in the anti-fracking campaign. And these 2 gentlemen put their heads above the parapets to challenge this crass attempt by INEOS to effectively buy British law. And what they are trying to do is effectively subjugate the Human Rights Convention and the government's own guidelines on peaceful protest, and subjugate it to a corporate injunction. Now, they didn't get what they wanted in court on Tuesday. INEOS were hoping to get their temporary injunction rubber stamped. They got the injunction in an ex parte hearing. In other words, nobody else was present. And on Tuesday, the judge made it very clear that he was of the opinion that INEOS had effectively misled him in the need to hold the hearing in private. So he has now ruled that there will be a full 3-day hearing in November at the Royal Courts, at the civil courts in London. Now, this is absolutely seminal in terms of the basics of our democracy, of freedom to assembly, freedom of speech, and the fundamental right to peaceful protest. And to make matters worse, if it wasn't bad enough with the police, and I will be expanding on this in Fracking Nightmare in about 45 minutes' time, but if it wasn't bad enough with the police, what we're also seeing is councils now starting to look to implement public order acts, or which would effectively ban assembly or protest on any piece of public land. And this would include filming, or taking any film that might be construed as intimidating to the individuals caught on film. So what we are seeing is an assault, a fundamental assault on the last vestiges of democracy in this country. And a couple of MPs in the country have acknowledged that INEOS here are indeed launching a direct attack on the basic rudiments of what we consider to be a free democratic society. Now, Joe Corry obviously has the resources to take care of himself, but Joe Boyd is, like myself, a man of few assets. And so Joe is putting his head above the parapet on the basis that the wider public will support his case and enable him to pay whatever legal costs are eventually awarded. Although hopefully, of course, it'll be a case that costs are effectively awarded against INEOS. But if you wish to help Joe, then please consider making a donation to his Crowd Justice Fund. Now, this scheme, this Crowd Justice Fund was launched literally just a few days ago on Monday. And as you can see, as of a couple of hours ago, he had already raised over £3,200 out of his current target of £15,000. So I think something like 122 people have contributed to this. But on the basis, I mean, every single NGO in the country that has any interest in maintaining any degree of libertarian philosophy in this country should be there. But Joe Corry and Joe Boyd are the ones that have stepped forward, and hopefully not only will Joe be able to cover his legal costs through the crowdfunding, but also there will be massive support when this case comes to court in November. And interestingly, the judge has also stated that he will hear evidence as to why the anti-fracking campaign has become one of the fastest growing social movements this country has ever seen.
I'm going to say this is a very important fundraising thing. I will certainly contribute to it. It takes a lot of bravery for people to stand up at the front end and go into court to fight things. You've done it. A lot of other people have done it, but it takes guts. We know that other people simply can't do that. So we're going to say here that if you're one of the people that know you can't do it, we need to support the people who can do it and get up front and go in and take them head on. And this is knife-edge stuff, because if one of these cases is lost, then this becomes the precedent case for the next bit of clampdown by the state. Or if we turn it the other way around, the state is so terrified at each of these cases because every case they lose is another shackle coming off people. Because if the precedent is they can't do all the things they're trying to do, then we're heading in the right direction. So we've got to fight each and every one of these cases. And it is the reason why the state is so tenacious in fighting even what appears to be insignificant little cases. They fight them tooth and nail, because if they don't win them, they're beginning to lose grip. And of course, enough people jump onto the crowdsourcing, enough people start fighting in the courts skillfully, then of course the public, the wider public, are capable of stopping this nonsense. I'll just throw in council tax, and I'll mention Danny Bamping, who's down here in Plymouth. He was the man who was able to actually get a bit of film of the courts saying, yes, essentially Plymouth City Council hires the courts when they're going after council tax money. And also that if everybody who was being chased by the council for council tax, it's usually about 2,500 people, if they all turned up in court together, of course there would be utter chaos, and then the fight back would begin. So getting into court, fighting, it's got to be in a knowledgeable, skillful way. It's no good going in if you don't know your stuff. But each of these cases very important, and I will certainly back this one.
I think it's a massive own goal for INEOS, and I'm actually going to thank the arrogance of Jim Ratcliffe and Tom Pickering and all the other, and Crotty and all the other sociopaths on the INEOS management team, because you have given us the opportunity to get this into the courts, and believe you me, we are going to make take maximum advantage of the opportunity to get a lot of this information out in the courts. So even if the ruling goes against us, it will go to appeal, as we know it will go to appeal if the ruling goes in our favour. But that's just yet another opportunity to get information into the wider arena of what is occurring in this rush to the corporatist state. Now, INEOS is a Swiss company. It's owned by Jim Ratcliffe, a Brit of Manchester or East Yorkshire, depending on who he's talking to. And they're based in Switzerland to effectively take advantage of the tax situation there. And this is a company that thinks that everybody, everything, and every government has its price. And we have to show that that is not the case. There are those of us who cannot be bought. And, you know, Joe Boyd, he was a tremendous support to me when we challenged the protest pens that Quadrilla wanted to introduce earlier in the year. And so it's a pleasure to be able to support the two Joes here in this case. And we'll see how that runs out.
This is brilliant, Ian, and it's very positive. We often get people saying to us in the UK column, yes, but what can we do? Here are people doing things, very important things. We need more and more people to get behind to support them. And I'll just bring in another subject. There was a mother a little while ago fought that her children should not be vaccinated. She did take a barrister to court with her eventually, but she was successful. So we've now got a precedent case which says you do not have to have your children vaccinated. Why do we have that precedent case? Because one mother said, I am not going to take this by the state, and she fought it. So what can we do? These people are doing it. We need to get behind them and back them all the way.
So just go back on the screen here. This is, if you, just put this into your search engine, stop the INEOS fracking injunction. And, you know, whatever you feel you can contribute, every little helps. And it'll give Joe a bit of peace of mind to know that, you know, he's got the financial backing and that INEOS will not be pursuing him through the bankruptcy courts, because as some of us can attest, that's not fun either. Anyway, Brian, we've overrun a tad, but it's a big subject. But it's a big issue. You know, it's not. This is not something that you know, can be dealt with in 2 or 3 minutes. And you know, we need people to do their own research. As always, do your own research, because as always, you know, we don't expect anyone to take anything we say at face value. It's only when people realise the truth for themselves that perhaps then they have the motivation to stick their head above the parapet and follow the lead of Joe Corrie and Joe Boyd and challenge the pernicious institutions that are trying to eradicate the rudiments of our democracy. I'll be expanding more on this issue in Fracking Nightmare, episode 111 at 9 o'clock later this evening. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Brian.